Thank you so much, Maria, and to the Foundation. And as a token of my gratitude for the invitation and for the excellent program you put together, I should say that the fact that we started a few minutes late was not because of the excellent organizers, but because of the Swede who lost track of time and arrived a little bit late. So that's all on me. My apologies, but I hope it was worth the wait. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for caring about free markets and free people. Because I have to be frank, sometimes I feel a little bit alone when I care about these things. Sometimes it feels like the whole world is opposed to these ideas that has brought the whole world so much opportunity and wealth. Capitalism is under pressure. It is now seen as a scourge of mankind in lots of ways. Did you happen to see the latest Indiana Jones movie? Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny? Well, it's a pretty good movie. I liked it, but not for its social commentary. Because at one point, Indiana Jones approaches the villain, played by Mads Mikkelsen, and says about an ancient mechanism that you stole it. But then another woman intervenes and says, and then I stole it from him. It's called capitalism. That's the take, the Hollywood take on capitalism. And actually, it's not that much worse than what we get sometimes on social media and in the social sciences. It seems like nobody likes free markets nowadays. One recent poll showed that just 20% of Americans appreciate capitalism, which means that more Americans believe in ghosts than in the benefits of capitalism. Another study showed that 56% in an international poll thinks that mankind is doomed. It's not just that it's bad, we're doomed, it's over because of, well, mostly environmental damage done by capitalism. And this is also the take that we get from politicians in European governments and American governments, from New Delhi and from Beijing, that global supply chains, free trade, it's dangerous. Now we need something else. We need the government to step in, to repatriate production, to start to pick winners in the economy and in technology and subsidize them heavily and make sure that the important jobs stay with us. So it's not perfect. It really isn't. Now we also get it, surprisingly, from the right wing of politics as well. Recently I presented my book in Washington, D.C., and my opponent said that, no, you don't get it. Free trade and capitalism has benefited only the rich. Inequality is increasing, and the big companies, they take over the planet. And we now need more heavy intervention, an active industrial policy, more protectionism, and a more generous welfare state with higher minimum wages. So he basically said all the things that traditional leftists usually say. But this guy was on the right of politics, from the think tank American Compass, a slightly Trumpian, big government conservative think tank. I got the message that the problem with our ideas, with the classical liberal attitude to the world and to the economy, is that we think that we shouldn't do anything. Do nothing. That's our policy. That's the message I got. If something goes wrong in the world, if something fails, if there's a major problem, then our response is do nothing. And of course, that doesn't sound very tempting. What's our solution to problem? Nothing. It sounds like we've given up, right? So then that's the question. Is that the policy? Is it the case that capitalism has failed? What I hear now from the left, from the right, from environmentalists, is the message that global capitalism has failed. Suddenly the new over-ideology is to demonize those who produce, it's to subsidize those who refuse to produce, and it's to canonize those who complain. Grievance is the new hard currency, and in that currency there's a lot of wealth out there. My question is this narrative true? I wrote this book because I don't think it is. How is capitalism doing? Well, as economists respond when you ask them, how are your kids? The answer is, compared to what? And that's the question. How has capitalism been doing compared to what? Because there are alternatives out there, and how have they been doing? We'll look into that. But first, let me say that I can understand the hostility, the fear of openness, of global capitalism, because it seems like the world is becoming more dangerous. It seems like we've gone through hard times. If you look at the past 20 years, it's been 20 years of horrors and of disasters, for real. We've had financial crises, we have had endless wars, we've had the global pandemic, and then Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and now this kind of inflation and interest rate spiral that we don't see the end of just yet. So it's been 20 awful years, and I can understand why it feels like openness and innovation and experimentation doesn't sound exciting. It sounds like you need someone to protect us. Some strong man, some big government that points with a whole hand and tells us what to do. But the interesting thing is that these 20 awful years have also been the best 20 years in mankind's history. Despite all these very real horrors. When you look at objective indicators of human living standards, we can see that they've never improved as much as they've done over these past 20 years. If we try to measure global wealth, the average level of global income by looking at GDP per capita, then around a third, almost a third, of all the wealth that mankind has ever attained throughout history was created over these past 20 years. Extreme poverty declined by 130,000 people every day for 20 years. Child mortality declined by almost half, which means that last year 4 million fewer children died than in 2002. And global chronic undernourishment declined by around a third. So it seems like we are doing something right, despite all the disasters and horrors that we are experiencing. And it seems strange, right? This is not what we would have expected. Had someone told us 20 years ago that we would get endless wars, geopolitical strife, global financial crisis, and a pandemic that killed in the millions and shut down the world, I think that most of us would have expected that we now lived in a post-apocalyptic scenario, that we would be in Mad Max and the Last of Us territory, right? But somehow we muddled through. It's strange, it's weird. There wasn't a plan for this. No one told us what to do and how to act. It reminds me of a story I recently heard about Mario Puzo, the famous writer of the Godfather novels, and who also adapted them for the big screen. And he was quite successful. The movies were very successful, and he won an Academy Award for his scripts for the movies. Now, after having done that, he thought that at some point I have to learn how to write movie scripts, because he had no formal education, he didn't know how to do it. So he bought a book on how to write for the movies. And in the first chapter it said, the first thing you need to know before starting to write for movies is to watch the Godfather movies. Because that's how you do it. So he didn't have a plan. He didn't have somebody tell him how to do this all. But by putting one foot in front of another and improvising and adapting to the challenges as they appeared, he managed to write the greatest movie that has ever been created. And in a way, it seems like that's what we do too. That's what humanity does all the time. We didn't have a plan for these past 20 years. And that's precisely why it worked, because it allowed millions of people to adapt to the new challenges, to look at the world from their local perspective and use their individual creativity to come up with the best solutions to how to solve all these problems. There wasn't a plan, there were millions of plans, and that's what saved us and made these disasters much less disastrous than they could have been. Just look at the pandemic. When it started and the world shut down, I, for one, started to hoard canned food and toilet paper, because I think if the world is shutting down, I need to get some access to food in the future for me and my family. And pretty soon, I was embarrassed by this action, because all the goods were back on the shelves in no time. What happened? What happened was that thousands of businesses and farmers and traders, they saw what was going on. They noticed the price signals that told them of desperate shortages in certain places and new opportunities in other places. And despite the tremendous shock of it all, where suddenly, the whole European restaurant industry was closed down, and at the same time, lots of people were hoarding new goods. How do we deal with this? Well, the experts started working on it. And the real experts are the ones out in the agricultural fields, in offices, in factories, who started to use their local knowledge and to think, if we're suddenly out of these resources, these inputs that we need for production, can we somehow tweak manufacturing to produce it in another way? If suddenly most of the workforce is gone, what can we do with the people who actually show up? And if we're suddenly in a situation where governments block borders, can we somehow reroute supplies and make sure that it works out? The amazing thing is that businesses rebuilt supply chains in real time. It's as Henry David Thoreau, the great transcendentalist writer and poet, put it 150 years ago, it seems like trade and commerce are made of rubber because they constantly bounce on top of all the obstacles put in their way. It was an amazing achievement, and we never even spent a minute to think about it because it just worked the way it does when entrepreneurs spend all their days and nights to rebuild supply chains. And then Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, and they had to do it all over again. Because at the start of the war, when one of the biggest exporters of food invaded one of the other biggest exporters of food, lots of people expected that now we'll see this surge in food prices and we'll see famines all over, and we'll run out of energy sources because of Russia's control of natural gas. But in just a few months, food prices were back to a lower level than before the invasion. Natural gas prices were down 80% in a few months because farmers and energy companies and exporters of liquefied natural gas instantly responded to the price signals and saw the new opportunities and started to produce and change their trade patterns to combat the shortages. And soon we were back on track again. Another amazing feat that we never read about, that we never heard about on the news, because that's just the way the world works when we give a certain degree of freedom to all those hard-working entrepreneurs, businesses, workers out there who are improvising and innovating ourselves out of almost every crisis. So I think that what we've seen over the past 20 years is the success of capitalism. It's the success story of free markets, whereby they haven't just dealt with the crises that have appeared, but also actually improved the world during this period. Because all these data about how the world is improving when it comes to poverty and health have been led by countries that have integrated the most into global free markets. So my point is that liberalism, capitalism, is not about doing nothing when a problem appears. It is to say, let all the experts look at these problems and try to come up with their solutions. It's to stop one ruler, one government from imposing certain systems and obligations and bans that stops the millions of people from experimenting in their own way. Because we know that especially in difficult times when the world is unpredictable and we don't know what will happen next, that's the moment when we need as much knowledge as possible, as much creativity as possible. And that's really what's unleashed when we allow people to experiment with their business models, with their trade patterns, with their work, and with their innovations. When they move to the parts of the economy where they can think that they can do the most for everybody else. So this temptation to have somebody stepping in to save us, the strong man, the big government who has a quick fix to solve all these things, is just a way of replacing the wisdom of the millions of people and their constant experimentation and constant discovery process of learning more about what works and what doesn't work. It's a way of replacing that with just the preferences and the attitudes of a few people at the top. And that's why it's so dangerous with centralization, with authoritarianism, with socialism, because it's a way of rejecting knowledge. It's a way of losing creativity and instead just put someone in charge and deal with it. And that's why it always fails. These ideas that we hear about from so many sides now, about new government intervention, is not something new and exciting. It has been tried before. It has a long and very dismal track record. Price controls constantly led to shortages. Tariff barriers led to the destruction of jobs and productivity. And active industrial policy, whereby politicians suddenly step in and second guess the decisions of markets and millions with their money, resulted in failure after failure. Those who now talk about why we should start to subsidize certain winners, they point to the few examples we've got of success stories. And obviously, if you step in everywhere and subsidize almost everything, something is bound to succeed. But those who do the research and looking at all these attempts can see that on every success, there is 100 failures. And failures are okay. We always fail. That's how markets progress and discover something new. But the problem when the government steps in and starts to pick winners and subsidize winners is that it short circuits the whole discovery process, because they stop the decisive actions of markets, of consumers, of the trade testing that goes on with every experiment, that tells you when something is bad and has to be stopped so that we channel capital and labor into what succeeds. It stops this by subsidizing a particular idea and stopping it from failing. And that's dangerous. And that's why we have this long list of government failures when we've picked winners in the old shipyards and the old steel plants and the war on cancer and the supersonic Concorde and Quero. Do you remember Quero? Of course, Somebody does, but almost no one does, because it was over almost before it began. Quero was the Franco-German attempt to build a European Google, because Gerhard Schröder and Jacques Chirac in 2005 said, this is what we've got to do to own the future. We will build a tremendous tech industry in Europe by involving 100 companies and millions of tax euros to build our own search engine. And then we'll triumph. And the French and German engineers couldn't even come to agreement on what they were searching for. Whether it's text, it's a picture, I don't know. They got angry and they got more money and they split up and they hate each other nowadays. That's often what happens. And that's okay if you're risking your own money. That's the key. And that's the thing that makes you a little bit cautious about what should happen next, what to invest in eventually. So we have this long list of failures every time we try these ideas. I don't think it's more than 10 years since Pablo Iglesias of Podemos fame said that Europe should learn from Venezuela and Hugo Chavez's policies, because that's the future. You can see he leads his country and he has a plan for it all and he will redistribute everything equally. Well, now we know that it was probably the biggest peacetime economic disaster in modern history. Per capita GDP collapsed by some 70% and almost 7 million people fled this experiment. Because every time you have a guy in charge who has all the solutions to problems, it means that they stop everybody else from looking for new solutions, and that's why it's so incredibly dangerous. It is not a new and exciting idea. It's been tried before, a long time before, and it always ends up in the same place. It's precisely like the story, if you read that, about a poor Brazilian prisoner who he dug a tunnel below his cell for 5 years to escape prison, and only to end up in the guard room. So after 5 years, he ended up there, thought he was free, but he was in the room with all the guards. That's what they do when they try to implement these same policies over and over again. We will always end up, even if it's a great 5-year plan, we will always end up in the guard room. That's how it works. And that's why it's so dangerous. That's why we have to argue against it. What I think that most people who want quick centralized fixes miss is that innovation is difficult. Wealth creation is difficult. It's as if they think that businesses, they just know how to print money. It seems so easy to them. Yeah, it seems easy to those who have succeeded with their business models, right? They never notice all those who failed and all the work it took to get there. But it seems easy, so why don't we push that button and create even more wealth? Let's just subsidize them and then perhaps something happens. That's not how it works. With every great business model that I've ever researched, every great innovation that I've looked at, it wasn't created in an easy way. It didn't come from just a stroke of genius or from a committee. It came from thousands of experiments and trial and error, and then lots of pushback from consumers and from funders, and then adaptation, new improvisation, new experiments, and then eventually through incremental progress, they end up with something that actually works, which is probably something else than they had planned for in the beginning. Most great business models started out as something completely different. So it's difficult, it's hard work, and it takes all these institutions, because innovation and the economy is a discovery process. It's not a button to push. It's a journey of discovery. And it's a difficult one, and lots of people fail. One of Sweden's great entrepreneurs once told me how he looked at innovation as walking over a minefield. It's a field of mines, and you don't know where they're buried. But if you end up in the wrong place, you'll be blown to bits. But over there on the other side is a successful business model, new goods and services, technological capacities that would enrich the whole of mankind. So you're going to have to get over there. But the mines are there, with lots of fickle consumers who change their mind constantly, lots of competition from strangers, difficult partners and associates and employees, lots of regulations and a changing business cycle, interest rates that keep on shifting, and impatient funders of your venture. It's dangerous out there. So what could possibly entice anyone to walk out there? The reward, the potential reward, that if you actually make it over there, you will be richly rewarded. You will get to keep the fruits of your labor, or at least most of it. That's the kind of incentive that will entice people to walk across this field. And most will never make it to that kind of wealth. And that's a shame. But the important thing for mankind is that some do, and find a safe path between the mines so that we end up over there on the other side, and then we can move on to the next minefield and try to come up with even more knowledge, capacity, goods and services that will enrich us all. That's how mankind continues to progress. This is what businesses does. This is what capitalists do. This is what innovators do all the time. They work constantly for others. They have to risk everything. And they have to pay the workers whether or not their business model will function. They pay the suppliers of inputs and natural resources. They have to pay their bank loans and the interest rate, and they have to come up with goods and services that someone is so interested in that they are willing to hand over lots of money to them. If they manage to make all these groups happy, and that's a big if, only then will they get anything for themselves, anything in return, something left. That's what profits are. Profits, it's often said, is something that's taken from other people. It's taken out of the organization, or it's taken from consumers or for workers. And that's nonsense. Profits, that's the little tiny piece that the businessman gets to keep of the value he creates for everybody else. And how big a share is that? Not big at all. Around 2%, according to William Nordhaus, the economist and Nobel laureate, who has looked at the implementation of new disruptive technologies, methods, goods and services in the American economy over a longer period. He notices that the wealth that has been created, the surplus created by these businesses, only around a little bit more than 2% does he get to keep. The rest of it goes to us. While we were sitting on our couch watching Netflix, we got 98% of it all. Because it ends up with better goods and services, new capacities, new knowledge, and increased purchasing power, because prices decline as this happens. And they get 2%, if they're successful. And of course, 2% of billions and billions of euros, that's quite a lot. And that's why we can look at some super rich and say, how could they ever afford this much money? But they can afford. They can deserve that much if they've created that much value for others and then get to keep something themselves. Because this is really what's important to us, to me, to you, I think, when it comes to the economy. It's not, we hear a lot of talk about economic relationships, about inequality. The fact that Elon Musk and Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, they're 10 million times richer than a normal, regular, middle-class person. And it seems like an injustice has been done and that the world is deteriorating. But if you're thinking about what's important, I don't think it is how many zeros someone has after the first digit in the bank account. It's what you can do with money. It's what you buy. It's the kind of lifestyle, the kind of necessities, comforts and goods that you can afford. And it's not really about euros and cents. And I sometimes think of that when I study history and family history. You know, this thought experiment. What if one of your ancestors from 200 years ago could find a time machine and come to our time, our day and age? So your grandpa's, grandmother's, grandfather's, grandmother comes back to see our world. And not just any place of that world, but into the home of one of these super rich people. Let's say she ends up in Bill Gates's house and looks at this incredible wealth. What would she say? What would she be most surprised by? What would she be most astonished by? I think, but please think about this yourself and add ideas if you come up with something else. But I think it would be things like the fact that Bill Gates, when he pushes a button, it's suddenly bright indoors, so that his kids or grandkids can do homework even late at night, and has access to warmth when it's too cold, or can cool it down with an air conditioner if it's too warm. The fact that he has an almost endless supply of clean drinking water coming out of a tap, and even warm water if he needs it for a shower. The fact that it seems like he's alive, even though he's now quite aged. He's got all his kids are alive, even though they're older than 50. Whereas in 200 years ago, some 50% of people didn't make it to adulthood. The fact that he has most of his teeth left. The fact that he can take a pill to make pain go away and even replace body parts if they deteriorate. The fact that, and of course we can go on and on, but this must be magic most of all. You know, this slight little box, which Bill Gates can use to talk to people in real time, even if they're on the other side of the planet. He can see what goes on over there in real time as it happens. And he can even, if he finds something interesting, he can hold it up and get a perfect rendition, a perfect picture to keep forever of what he has just seen. And he can walk into a slightly bigger box made of metal with 4 wheels, and he can sort of drive faster than a horse could run. And if he gets into a tubular metal thing with wings, he can even fly to another continent and see other places. And all of these things must seem like magic to our grandmother's grandfather's grandmother, father's grandmother, right? But the most and it is, because it's extraordinary. But the most extraordinary thing is that these things are things that we have in common with Bill Gates and with Elon Musk and with Jeff Bezos, the things that are of most importance. Then there are other things that separates us, but I don't think that she would pay as much attention to that. Bill Gates drinks much more expensive wine, I'm sure, than I do. His metal tube is his own, so he doesn't have to wait in line at the airport. I have to do that. And of course, those are major differences. That creates lots of grievance. Today we're angry. Why should they get to have a private jet, drink such expensive wine, have branded jackets that cost them tens of thousands of euros? But I don't think that our ancestors would really consider that the great grievance, compared to the fact that we're able to see our kids grow up. We now live to such a long life in economically free countries that we might even get to see our grandkids. And the fact that we have water. We don't have to think about food, where food will come from the next day. In all these cases, all these things that really makes life better and more comfortable, all of these things, I would dare to say, are more equally distributed than at any point in human history. So we don't live in an unequal age. We live in the most equal age ever, no matter how many billions they then have in a bank account or on the stock market, because that's not really what matters to us, and it's not what would have mattered to our ancestors. And why is it that life is so equal today compared to other ages? Well, the simple answer is, it's because of those capitalists. It's because of all those entrepreneurs and innovators and the fact that they have been allowed to become super rich by transforming luxury technologies that were only for the richest a few generations ago into everyday necessities that almost everyone can afford in rich countries today. And then they earn billions and billions by doing that. And that's great. Because what that means is that they've found a way over the minefield and got to keep 2% of the immense wealth that they have shared with us. And of course, they don't do this because they're kind and nice and decent people. They might be, some of them, I'm sure, are great. But that doesn't matter. They might do it because they're only in it for themselves. But that's the wonderful aspect, the best aspect, I think, of free markets. That it's the first economic system in history where you can only get rich by enriching others. It's the first system where you can only acquire wealth by bringing wealth to others and giving them something that's of more importance to them than the money that they hand over to you. In all previous systems of slavery, of feudalism, of socialism, of fascism, it was always about acquiring wealth by stealing it from others, by submission and stealth and of conquest. Capitalism is the first system where the richest only got rich by offering someone something, by saying, would this improve your life to the extent that you actually would want to pay me for it? And that's a beautiful and a highly moral system that recognizes the dignity of each and every one of us, because it gives us the right to walk away and to walk somewhere else and to only engage in deals if we both think that it will make our life better than not engaging in those deals. And that's why we have all these, all those double thank yous in the grocery store or in the boardroom. That when you shake hands or when you hand over the money, you say thank you and they say thank you. And I'm brought up with the idea that you say thank you to someone who has done you a favor. And that's exactly what happens in markets. We both do each other favors constantly. And that's how we both get richer and create a richer and a more dynamic society with more wealth for others. So this is not Indiana Jones territory. It's not, I stole it and then I stole it from you and sold it to someone else, and that's why it is capitalism. On the contrary, this is the opposite. This is the first system that's not based on stealing and taking, but on creating. And that's the beauty of it, and that's why it's a highly moral system. However, it's not a popular system, as I started by pointing out. It seems often quite dangerous, and it seems unpredictable, because it's based on freedom, and you don't know what people are going to create next. You don't have certainty of what will happen around the next corner. Whereas any kind of interventionist politician can always give you the pretense of safety, security, predictability by telling you what will happen next. But you never really know if people are free to make their own decisions. And that's why I think, especially in times when we feel like the world is a bit dangerous, that it's not enough with freedom and exploration, and let's hope that people will come up with even better things tomorrow. We have this urge to find someone who will take care of everything, who will protect us and who will save us. But we've seen where that leads. We've seen that before, again and again, and it's just a way of replacing knowledge with somebody's preference. Insanity, it said, is repeating the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Well, you know, Bidenomics and Trumpian protectionism and Pedro Sanchez's everything is repeating the same old government overreach and expecting something else than running out of other people's money and ending up in a disaster. And that's why it's always a mistake. And they always remind me, all these politicians and the populists who say that I've got the solution, I will fix everything. Top down. They always remind me of the story about the job interview. A guy walks into a job interview at an office and they look at his CV and they say, oh, it says here that you're quick at mathematics. You're quick at doing calculations. Right, yes, I am. Okay, so what is 16 times 17? Oh, that's 42. No, that's not even close. No. But it was quick. And that's exactly what goes on when populists and socialists say that they have a quick fix. They don't have patience for trial and error and the experiments of free people trying to find a better way across the minefield. They just say, let's just walk across it, I'll find a way for us all. And again, we're blown to bits. So let's not fall for that. Let's stick to real mathematics and not to quick mathematics. That's my conclusion of history and of the present. So therefore my message is, pro-capitalists of the world, unite. We have nothing to lose but our chains, our confiscatory taxes, our counterproductive regulations, and our destructive tariff barriers. But we have a world to win. Thank you.